Hi, I'm Duncan Moss, and I'd like to welcome you to my latest video blog. Today, I'll be talking about one of my favourite actors, Boris Karloff, who I first encountered when I was watching a horror movie in the UK in early 1976. It was called The Curse of the Crimson Altar, and it wasn't a great movie by any stretch of the imagination, but Boris Karloff was in it, and he certainly helped raise the film drastically. It also had Christopher Lee in it, who was also very good, and they helped bring the film up several notches, and I became a fan there and then. And Boris was born on the 23rd of November in 1887. He was known as William Pratt, or to his friends, Billy Pratt. He came from a very distinguished family. He had several older brothers, I think five in all, and a half sister who was quite a lot older than him. And they brought him up basically. He said his brothers were very stern. One of them was a judge. One of them was worked in the diplomacy service. Um, and Sir John Pratt became head of MI6 during the Second World War. And he had his first encounter with acting in a play for his local church, where he played the Demon King in a production of Cinderella. And he was taken aside by the vicar, who praised his performance, said it had great gusto, but he said, "Billy, you're going to have to turn it down. Because at the moment it looks like evil is going to win over good, and we can't have that. So could you tone it down a notch?" It was clear that he was very keen on the arts and drama. He had an education which his brothers dictated, where he went to several boarding schools in the hope that he would become work overseas in something like the diplomat service or something. Well, he would work overseas, but not quite the way his brothers hoped. He went to King's College University in London, in the Strand, but attended so many plays and did so little work that he was basically slung out of the university. And to escape the wrath of his brothers, he boarded a ship bound for Canada with all his belongings, and settled in Canada, where he supported himself on a number of menial jobs that he could get his hands on. And along came, in 1910, a group of actors, a traveling group of actors, who he joined. He was very, very keen, and that would give him a steady income. He wasn't paid a massive amount of money, but he had a very good photographic memory, so he often got the longest parts in apparently in the performances, and he'd worked steadily through the second decade of the 20th century on stage, and traveling around Canada. But the cinema was taking off by the end of the second decade, and realizing that traveling theatres were going to be obsolete, Boris made his way down the west coast of Canada. That's when he started acting. That he gave his name, changed his name to Boris Karloff. It was supposed to be something to do with the Russian relations, Karloff, and he got Boris out of the cold Canadian air. Well, he was a little warmer down in Los Angeles. but he would stand outside the gates of the film companies to see whether anyone could hire him for films. And because he had a very gaunt face, he was often picked for heavies in movies. The parts were very small, but as the 20s progressed, the parts, although remaining small, the parts became in films were more important. He was in a film called The Bells in 1926 with Lionel Barrymore, who liked him so much they used him in 2 other movies. He acted with his brother John Barrymore in a film called The Mad Genius, only in a small part. And he also acted with Edward G. Robinson, Laurel and Hardy, quite a few big names. And in 1930, he was in a play in New York called The Criminal Code, where he played a sinister character called Galloway. And the play didn't last particularly long. It lasted about 7 weeks, which was sort of a modest success. A talent scout from Columbia Pictures in the audience thought The Criminal Code would make a great movie, and he persuaded Columbia to buy the rights. Because they don't have a lot of contract players, small part players, Columbia, the talent scout suggested using Boris Karloff in the film as well. And the film was directed by Howard Hawks. It was a smash hit, and Boris's parts became bigger, and the films became better. More important pictures, and 5-star Final with Edward G. Robinson was another film that Boris could be proud of, as indeed his small part in Scarface with Paul Mooney. Boris was in 1931, around this time, he's working on a film called Graft at Universal Studios. Director James Whale, who's had massive success with Journey's End and Waterloo Bridge, has now got the pick of Universal's projects that are in the pipeline, and he chooses Frankenstein, which had been recently abandoned by director Robert Florey, and he picks up the reins for Frankenstein, and he thinks that Boris will be absolutely superb as the Frankenstein creature. And Boris has lunch with him, and he says yes, please. He is very interested in playing the part of the creature. He's taken to meet Jack P. Pierce, Universal's head makeup artist. They will spend quite a lot of time working on how the monster should look like, and eventually James Whale, Jack Pierce, and Boris come up with this look for the Frankenstein creature. Universal will be very sensible, and they'll copyright it so that no other film company can use the monster's likeness without paying royalties. And he's got green skin, and of course the film's in black and white, but that's how he look in colour. And the film will be a tremendous success, and Boris will play the character like an autistic child, and what happens to the creature in the film is very sad. But on a plus note, when the film has become a tremendous success and saved Universal Studios from bankruptcy, Universal will sign Boris up for a star contract, and he'll breathe a sigh of relief. He said in an interview, "For the first time in over 20 years, I'll know where my next meal is coming from." And he had been dubbed the new Lon Chaney, Lon Chaney, the great character actor of the 1920s, had died, and Hollywood had wanted a replacement very badly. And the press said that Boris Karloff was the new Lon Chaney. Slightly ironic because Lon Chaney had given him advice in the late 20s saying, find something that you can do that nobody else can do, and people will take notice of you. Boris was full of praise for Lon Chaney, but said, I'm a totally different actor to him. And he would appear in The Old Dark House, which was as Morgan the Brute Man, which was based on a story by J.B. Priestley for Universal. Then Universal would loan him out for The Face of Fu Manchu. And at the end of 1932, he would be in The Mummy, playing where the studio took massive advantage of his very gaunt face. In most of the Mummy movies, the actor keeps the bandages on. But once the Mummy has come to life in this film, the bandages are discarded, and the Mummy takes on the role of a character called Turhan Bey, I think it is, Armand Bey. And he just goes round with his face looking very, very wrinkled, looking about 3,000 years old, but no one picks up that he is actually the Mummy until the end of the film, when he tries to do something but is not able to do it. It's a very fine film. It was a smash hit. Boris will then go over to England to make The Ghoul and see his surviving brothers. In 1935, he'll repeat his role as the Frankenstein monster in The Bride of Frankenstein, where he will be able to widen his superb characterization even further. Very moving. There's a couple of bits where the monster cries, and it's very, very moving. And Christopher Lee said that if a performance like that had been done today, the actor would be up for an Oscar. Boris will repeat the role one more time in Son of Frankenstein with Basil Rathbone and Bela Lugosi and Lionel Atwill in 1939, and that will also be a smash hit. Boris will then do a series of Mad Doctor roles for Columbia Pictures before leaving the cinema for a while. He will appear in a comedy thriller play called Arsenic and Old Lace, which is written very, very much with Boris in mind. Boris gets very jittery during the making. During rehearsals, he doesn't think it's going to work. He's very worried. It's his first time on stage for over 10 years. But everybody reassures him he's going to be great. And after the first performance, he falls in love with the play and is in it for the next 3.5 years. He'll have a break, not to have a rest, but to make another film. I think gets lured with... is it Lured or The Climax with Lucille Ball? I can't remember. I can't remember everything, folks. This is just to whet your appetite. I keep saying that. When Arsenic and Old Lace finishes, he will weep because he's had such a wonderful time. Sadly, he doesn't get the part in the cinema version owing to a misunderstanding. But it won't be the last time he plays the role. And... I'll go ahead and talk about that a little later. But he goes back to the cinema in a film that will surprise his fans. He's back in the Frankenstein, Universal Frankenstein franchise. Not to reprise his role as the monster, but to play a mad scientist called Dr. Gustav Niemann, who will... do all sorts of things during the movie, including murdering several members of the cast. He will have a sidekick a companion in the film called Daniel, a hunchback, who's played superbly by the very underrated actor J. Carroll Naish. who's absolutely brilliant, with evil, but also with a lot of pathos. Dr. Neiman basically betrays his loyalty. The film was only runs for 1 hour, 10 minutes. It's got Dracula, the Frankenstein creature, and the Wolfman in it. There's not a lot of time to sit back and relax. Everybody has to really thunder along. But Glenn Strange was very keen to do the part as well as he could. And Boris, he asks Boris for help, and Boris gives him coaching lessons after the day shooting has finished. They will stay behind, and Boris will give him coaching about the Monsters Walk. And in the film, the two of them side by side will not have a particularly pleasant fate. I don't want to spoil it by saying what happens, but and Glenn Strange would carry on playing Boris's character in both House of Dracula and Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. Boris will continue to work in films. He's in a film called The Unconquered for Cecil B. DeMille. He's in a small part in The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, comedy starring Danny Kaye, where he's only in the film for about 10 to 15 minutes, but he'll steal the film. He'll then, in 1950, he'll be involved in a fabulous musical of Peter Pan on stage, where he plays Captain Hook and the father of the children. It'll run for over 2 years, and Boris will be in the part for most of it. It'll generate a massive amount of money for the Great Ormond Street Hospital, which will delight Boris because he loves children and does a lot of charity work for underprivileged children, including visiting sick children in hospital. And he'll plunge into television and have a very enjoyable time. He almost escapes his horror persona. And he'll have another stage smash, which is called The Lark. He will play a character called Cardinal... what's he called? No, he's called Bishop Couchon. I think I've pronounced it right. In The Lark with Julie Harris, who plays Joan of Arc. It's also got Christopher Plummer in it. And Bishop Couchon is part of the prosecution against Joan and tries desperately hard to get Joan to change her statement, refute the voices, so that her life will be spared, because he really does care very much about her. The play was a smash hit. There's a television version done. I think also a radio one done with the same cast, and I'd love to get a copy of that on DVD sometime. He will also, just after that, go and reprise his performance in Arsenic and Old Lace in Alaska for a drama group there who are hoping to be able to build their own theatre. And Boris will be very kind and waive his fee for appearing in several performances with the young actors to the fund for building the theatre. And that's mentioned on This Is Your Life, which he does about that time. And somebody comes on from that production and says that Boris has given them a very generous donation, and Boris gets very embarrassed about it. It's a very good programme, This Is Your Life. What's made very funny is that they bring a present for Evie, Boris's wife, and they can't find the I think it's a brooch, and they can't find it, and it's live TV. And it's going all around the chairs, the settees, trying to see where it's slipped down. They say, "Don't worry, Evie, we'll find it for you." But the show ends without them finding it. I do presume eventually they did find it. In the 1960s, he carries on doing film work and cinema movies and radio. And he will be introducing a fantastic horror fantasy anthology series called the Thriller series, which will be a tremendous success. And Boris will act in several of the episodes. Just before that, he'll do a series called The Veil, where he'll perform in 8 of 9 episodes. But because Hal Roach studio gets into financial difficulties, they can't continue the series, so it never gets shown until it comes out on DVD in I think the noughties. Boris will also make some films for Roger Corman, and in 1966 he will narrate a cartoon for Chuck Jones called How the Grinch Stole Christmas, and he'll win a Grammy Award for that. He will then appear in a horror movie called The Sorcerers with Ian Ogilvy, and he'll then make a film called Targets for a young director called Peter Bogdanovich, who also plays Sammy, the film scriptwriter in the film. Boris plays a aging horror film star who's basically fed up with the industry, thinks that the world is more terrifying than anything that the cinema can produce. He's disillusioned with everything. He pulls out of his contract, says, I'm not going to make another film. And Sammy is the scriptwriter is devastated, as indeed is his secretary, who is, I can't remember her name, but she's put in a very fine performance. It's a great movie, and I won't spoil it for you by telling you much anymore about it, but the BFI are going to release it recently, but it hasn't happened as yet. I don't know whether that might be something to do with Peter Bogdanovich's very sad death. I'm not sure, but hopefully it'll be out soon. Boris then made a film called The Curse of the Crimson Altar, which was not a great movie. In fact, he catches a chill during the film and has to convalesce for 3 months. He'll go to America to make 4 cinema movies, but shot back to back. And they're not great movies. In fact, they don't even make it to the cinema. They're sold for a package deal for TV. Boris has now got his legs in braces. He will be using his photographic memory to memorize lines. Sometimes he's not quite sure which movie he's in, but he can remember and learn lines very quickly. And he strikes up a friendship with a lady on the set whose little daughter of 7 is in braces. And he asks a lot of questions about the little girl, who is eventually brought to the set to meet him. And so that was rather nice. And a lad who does a portfolio of Boris while these films are being made. Boris sees the photographs and says to the young lad, "These are some of the best portfolio photographs of me I've ever seen." So it wasn't quite the doom and gloom, these movies that some people have suggested. He'll appear in a couple of live television shows, one of them being the Red Skelton Show, where he'll do a sketch with his old friend Vincent Price, and then he'll basically appear in an episode of the TV series The Name of the Game, before returning to the UK, where he becomes very, very ill and is rushed to King Edward the Seventh Hospital in Midhurst, Sussex. where he will remain for 2 months until his sad death on the 2nd of February 1969. He'll continue to work, doing his Reader's Digest into a cassette recorder. When he's got the air in his lungs to be able to breathe, because the arthritis now in his legs is causing him to have breathing difficulties. And he will give a very generous donation to the hospital where he's at. And he also give write checks out to the team of nurses who are looking after him. And he showed that even when things were very bad, he was a man who thought very much of others. He will, when his death, he'll have tributes coming from all over the world for him. A great gentleman of the industry. His funeral was in Guildford, and there's a plaque for him in the Actors Church in London. His films are still loved by his fans. New fans are coming up all the time, discovering his work, as indeed with a lot of actors. He was certainly nothing like the monster that he played on screen, but he also played plenty of good guys as well in movies. And I'm just trying to think of anything that he was. He also gave a generous donation to his local church when he settled in England, little village church, and he would. Some children tried to steal some apples from his garden. And he said to them, all you had to do, guys, was knock on the door and I'd let you have some. He said, take some, but don't just knock on the door and ask me for them. Don't try to steal them. And they thought they were going to die, these children, because they knew that they thought the Frankenstein monster lived there. But of course, the Frankenstein monster, played by Boris, is not horrible. He's just misunderstood and makes mistakes because he's abandoned. But I love Boris. His performances are very, very good. He was a very fine actor. And my boss at the British Board of Film Classification, James Furman, greatly was a great fan of his as well. So if you haven't discovered Boris Karloff, have a look at some of his work. Try the Frankenstein movies because they are terrific, and there's loads of very fine films that he made over a career that went of stardom that went on for nearly 40 years, and of course his acting career went on for nearly 60. So as I say, I'm a massive Boris Karloff fan, as indeed all the other Universal horror stars. And but do check him out. And if you like this and want to subscribe to my channel, please click the subscribe button, click the like button, forward it to a friend, and maybe I'll see you again. Okay, God bless, take care, bye bye.